verses 54 and 55. As a king or a wealthy householder, giving his children various clay-made animals, pleases them and makes them play with the toys, but later gives them real ones, so I, making use of various forms and images of things, instruct my sons, but the limit of reality can only be realized within oneself. Buddhism covers a vast period of time and a vast variety of teachings. In these verses is an attempt to get some perspective on this. The previous verses have been about dismantling our notion, our investment in an objective reality, a physical reality. But many of the Buddha's teachings, especially the earlier ones, assume the reality of a physical world. They're often about analysing that physical world into its basic components, but the point is still to transform our relationship with that physical world, that material world. But there still seems to be the assumption amongst the Buddhists, the early Buddhists, that the material world is something real. It's an assumption held by many, if not most, modern Buddhists who don't seem to wish to question that. They're all about changing the world for the better, rather than realizing that that world has no substance. Again, who wants to argue with changing the world for the better? There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing to do, hopefully. But it's not the point of Buddhism. The point of Buddhism is to transform our relationship with that world, and the ultimate transformation arises from realizing that there is no external world. So this slightly patronizing verse is pointing this out, and it's also pointing out that no teachings can take you to the limits of reality. It can only be realized within oneself. And this is what I'm trying to put across by this term, a sense of being, coming back to your sense of being. Instead of putting our sense of being out there into other people, into things, into ideas, into concepts, into beliefs. All these things siphon off our sense of being. We come back to our essential presence, our essential awareness. This is what we have to realize within oneself, and one of the biggest obstacles to doing this is spiritual teachings, particularly in this context, Buddhist teachings. All teachings are relative. All teachings are redundant once you've touched this sense of being. Although I should point out, they're redundant in the sense that they'll take you to this sense of being, but they can be very useful, and it's worth revisiting these teachings once you have touched your sense of being, once you've touched enlightenment, because the effort then is to remain established in enlightenment. This is the work of the Bodhisattva. The usual understanding of the Bodhisattva is that this is somebody looking for enlightenment, but is not doing it because they want everybody else to get enlightened first. Well, this is nonsense. The Bodhisattva is an enlightenment being. The Bodhisattva is somebody who's touched enlightenment and is working to become established in it. And to do that, they have to transform their relationship with the so-called external world. This is what's meant by making the rest of the world enlightened. You have to realize its empty nature, so that every moment is enlightenment. And we get sucked in to these ideas of self and external world, of an individual self and an external world, less and less often. There's a very similar story told in another sutra about the householder, the wealthy householder, who gives his children various toys, or at least he gives the promise of various toys. The house is on fire. And rather than scare the children, make them panic, he tells them that outside there are some wonderful toys. And depending on the child, he will say a particular toy. And maybe it's a clay chariot or a golden chariot. And in this way the children happily and eagerly run out of the house. Hopefully by that time they've realised what's happened and they're not going to be disappointed that the toy is not there, but they can appreciate their good fortune in getting out of the burning house. So this is how the Buddha's teachings are seen. Various promises are made. There's a well-known promise made to one bhikkhu about all these dove-footed nymphs in the heavens that await him. It's rather like the Islamic paradise with all these virgins waiting for you. The idea being to stop investing in the material world. And of course there are no dove-footed virgins waiting for you. But hopefully once you've followed certain practices and got to a certain level, that's no longer important. And the classic case here is supernormal powers. So many people look at the wisdom teachings and things like yoga because they think they might get supernormal powers. Never mind that it never happens. You don't see people flying through the air, and yet people will practice. People will even write books about it, about how to develop supernormal powers. That's a way of sucking people in, and it works. It works. The Lankavatara Sutra itself is supposed to have supernormal powers. It's a well-known story. It's a story about Bodhidharma, which I might tell again at some point, about how he used the Lankavatara Sutra to dispel some poisons. Although I think it's quite clearly a metaphorical story. But there's still the idea that the Lankavatara Sutra has got special powers, which is why also many Tibetan monks have spent generations reciting the sutras, because they believe they're books of power. And we must be grateful to them, because this is how they've been preserved. If they were just wisdom teachings, they would probably have been dismissed, but the idea that they're books of power, that keeps it going, that keeps people interested, and eventually perhaps they'll find the true value. Once they've stepped out the burning house, then what comes is not the fulfillment of their desires, but the relief, the immense relief that comes from realizing they've escaped from a burning house. This is the relief of liberation. It's the relief of realizing your own sense of being. And there can be no richer reward than that.